My name is Jessa Frost. I'm the program director at Northhouse Folk School up in Grand Marais, Minnesota. Hopefully, I know many of you have been able to join us on campus, but I'm sure there are a few of you out there who haven't yet had a chance to visit us and have in fact discovered the school through the virtual world that has become so important in these pandemic times. We normally, this weekend is one of our busiest weekends of the year. We host a really wonderful event called Winter's Gathering and Arctic Film Festival. And people come from all over and they camp in stoves with woods, or I'm sorry, they camp in winter camping tents with wood stoves and yurts and all kinds of interesting places next door. And many people also stay in really nice condos on Lake Superior and local hotels. But the thing that draws everybody to this event is a shared love of winter, and in particular of the far Arctic North and the stories of adventure and history and cultural background that come from the Arctic regions in particular. And so this year, obviously, gathering together in that way was a little bit less feasible. And so we've brought this event online, in fact, all month, which has been really fun. And that support has been made possible by the tremendous support of the Northhouse community and the many members who have donated to support the work of the school, especially as we deal with really reduced programming revenue from the pandemic. So thank you. I know that many of the folks here today are members and supporters of the school. If that's something that you haven't been able to do and you are able, today is a really great day to do it because it is Give to the Max Day in Minnesota. So if you go to givemn.org, I believe, you can make a donation there that helps support the school. You can do the same thing on northhouse.org. So it is a great day of philanthropy in the state of Minnesota, and we would love to have you take part of that if you can. I also want to tell you about the other events coming up. With Winter's Gathering, we're wrapping up the event Saturday. But there's a couple of things yet going on. Tomorrow at noon will be a lunch and learn with the stars of this week's Arctic film, which was called This Mountain Life. It's still available to watch. You can find the links on our website if you haven't had a chance to do that. It'll be available until noon tomorrow. And after that, it vanishes. We got special permission from the filmmakers to make it available to stream. But the two stars of the film, of the documentary, I guess, who are the mother and daughter who who do this incredible hike in British Columbia, will be joining us for lunch for a Q&A about the film. So if you can, join us at noon tomorrow for that. And then on Saturday night, very exciting, the annual Cold Snap Poetry Slam. And so that is really fun to watch. It is also really fun to participate in. You don't have to have written your poem. You can read a poem. In fact, it just inspired me to visit our local bookstore and get the new Margaret Atwood book because I figured I'd find a good winter themed poem in there. So if you'd like to join us as a participant in the Cold Snap Poetry Slam or an audience member, you can do that on our website, northhouse.org. So, and the other thing that will be happening tomorrow is we did a big survey of really great Northern and Arctic film shorts. So things that are 5 minutes or less. Some people might call them YouTube videos, but that's where most of them are located. We will be publishing the playlist for about 90 minutes of awesome Arctic and Northern themed short films tomorrow in our e-news. So you'll be able to get that through the e-newsletter, which you can sign up for and still get again on our website. I think that's the end of my my commercials and information. This is a Zoom webinar, so don't worry if you can't see your face. You're not supposed to. But you can participate and ask questions. There's a couple of ways to do that. You can use the chat function, which is the little kind of text messagey looking bubble down at the bottom of the screen. Or what's even better is if you can use the Q&A. That way your questions don't get kind of lost in the stream. So feel free to enter those questions into the Q&A at any time during the presentation. Dr. Jennifer Burnham will be answering them at the end of the presentation. We'll have time we should have plenty of time to do that. So, but if you want to not forget your question midstream, that's a great place to put it in. So I think that is all I have to tell people. So it is really a pleasure for me to welcome Jenny, Dr. Jennifer Burnham, with us. Jennifer is at Augustana College, where she is the director of the Augustana Center for Polar Studies. And we actually crossed paths because Jenny was a student in some of our online classes this fall, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, and mentioned that she was a professor, and Sarah, our staff member who was hosting, looked her up to see what she taught and said, oh, I have an idea, and sent me her name and said, you should reach out. She might have a great talk. And that is exactly what we did. So the story of North House just being a place where people with shared interest and curiosity connect, and then you just never know where that's going to lead. So thank you so much for joining us, and we can't wait to learn more about those photogenic little birds.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I really have to resist the temptation to say it's great to see everyone, because of course I can't see you. You can see me here. But it's really exciting that you're here to learn a little bit more about puffins, these birds that are so great to look at. They're very enigmatic. They're very characteristic of the Arctic, but we want to learn a little bit more about them. So today I'll walk you through maybe a pandemic relief. We don't have to think about any kind of social distancing or anything like that. We're just going to wipe that away and move to the Arctic and take a look at some of these fantastic birds here. So I'm going to start my presentation here and share my screen with you here, so you can see some of these pictures. Alrighty, great. So as Jessa mentioned, I'm at Augustana College and I'm in Illinois. So there is an Augustana University, there is an Augustana in Canada, but we are the Augustana that's in Illinois here. And I've been fascinated with the Arctic since I was a kid. I think both the Arctic and the Arctic, actually. A lot of really interesting things happening in the poles. And I was really very fortunate to be able to study in graduate school, both in the Antarctic and in the Arctic. And so I'll just tell you a little bit about myself and who I work with, and then we'll get into the exciting world of the puffins. So I started my graduate research in 2003 working in Northwest Greenland, and I was primarily looking at soils. So I wasn't looking at birds, I wasn't looking in the sky, I wasn't on the ocean, I was on the land, digging soil pits all over the place. And a couple years into my graduate research, ran into this guy who is now my husband, but he's Kurt Burnham, and he is an ornithologist. And we ended up falling in love, we got married. And as we progressed in our careers, we realized that having two separate field seasons at the same time, doing different research topics, it was not feasible. So I shifted gears and I really took my work into biogeography. So I'll tell you more about that as we go along, why in the world there's a geographer working with puffin birds. That just doesn't seem to make sense. Why would that be? But here, since 2008, I've been working with a group called the High Arctic Institute. This is a nonprofit that my husband, Kurt, runs. He's been working in the Arctic since 1990, so we have a long history of family connections in the Arctic. And so I've been working with him since 2008, and we've been studying about 26 different bird species throughout northwestern Greenland. And this is quite a family affair now. Not only did Kurt's father work in Greenland since the 1970s, but now we have the third generation of Burnhams that are also in the Arctic. These are our two boys, and they came with us for our 2019 field season. They got to do everything right alongside us and the rest of our research team. So you can see them holding the stars of our show here, holding some puffins. And they even got to do some pretty exciting rappelling with Dad down cliffs. And if you look at this image in the bottom left-hand corner, I'm gonna lie and say, oh, I was not nervous at all. No, sending my 8-year-old over a cliff. But they did a great job, and we're looking forward to maybe having them with us here in the future. We also have other collaborators that work with us, and I don't want to mislead you in any way that I am the puffin expert and I know everything about them. It really takes a whole research team to do this. And so we have researchers from across the United States. We have some international collaborators with us as well. All the photos that you're going to see in this presentation, actually 99% of all of them are going to be from our research team. We have some very, very talented photographers, and I think you'll be impressed with some of the photos that they allowed me to share with you here today. We also need field assistants, right? So I mentioned a couple of them here, but also one of the benefits of working at an undergraduate institution is that I can bring students with me. So again, since 2008, we have brought a student with us, an undergraduate student. I think our youngest was 19 and our oldest was 21. So young people in the Arctic, exposing them to all the exciting things about the Arctic and research and the realities of research. But the weather is not great all the time. Things don't go the way we planned, things break down, etc. So they've got to experience a lot of those ups and downs right alongside with us. And many of them have actually done their own research projects as well. And many of them have actually been on research papers that they've published with us. So I'm really excited about that part. So let's get on to the Arctic here. Let me tell you a little bit about where we're working and how it compares to some other places in the Arctic that you're familiar with. I have heard from Jessa that many of you are actually very familiar with the Arctic. So I'm not going to go through all of the details, but just kind of hit a few highlights for how this region where we work is quite different from other parts of the Arctic. So here we're looking at a circumpolar map of the Arctic. And the red star indicates the region in Northwest Greenland where we do our research. This is based out of the Thule Air Base, so it's a US military installation. What you're going to see here is a rough outline of the Arctic Circle. And so we work about 700 miles north of the Arctic Circle and about 900 miles south of the North Pole. And we're roughly between 76 and 77 degrees north latitude. The other thing that you're going to see on this map are 3 different colors, and they are representing one of the many ways that you can divide the Arctic into different categories. This is based on temperature primarily, but we have regions called the high Arctic, the low Arctic, and the subarctic. And you can see this darkest color is generally in northern parts of Canada and into Greenland, far northern Russia, and into Svalbard here. So the high Arctic is where we work. There are no trees here. There are no shrubs, or if there are shrubs, they're very, very short. They only grow close to the ground and they grow out rather than growing up. In many places, this is what it looks like in the high Arctic, especially if you're close to an ice sheet. Very, very little vegetation. People looking at this might think it looks very devoid of life, but there's definitely life there, and you can see actually a few little green specks here and there amongst all the rocks. Some places of the high Arctic do look a little bit more vegetated. Here's an example of a wetland where we do some of our research. Again, you can see no trees, no shrubs, but a little bit more lush green environment. This is what we call lush in the high Arctic. In the high Arctic, we also have the very characteristic pictures that you see of glaciers calving into fjords and icebergs everywhere. This is definitely a common sight, especially early in the field season. We can only be in Greenland doing our research when the birds are there, and the birds are there when the ocean is open. So our field season generally starts at the end of June, beginning of July, somewhere around there, and ends at the beginning of August. So it's a pretty short window when we can be there, and it's a short breeding window for all the bird species as well. And so again, these icebergs are really beautiful to look at, but for us, they're a bit of a hazard in many cases, because to get to the majority of our field sites, we need to get there by boat. And this is our vessel. It's an open boat. It's about 25 feet long. It's called a safe boat. It is specifically designed for Arctic research. And you maybe have seen boats similar to this used by the Coast Guard, at least in the United States. But we do need to always be aware of icebergs, where they are, sea ice moving in. So it's a bit of a hazard, but it's something that we're all up for the challenge here. Many of the areas where we're doing our research are what are called coastal areas. So we're not always inland, and we're not out in the middle of the ocean, but we're working along the coastline here. So this is just one of our research sites here in the bottom left-hand corner. You can see how small our boat is, or at least how high up the photographer is for this picture. This is one place where we study birds in this. This is lush, believe it or not. This little spot of green here is a lush valley here. We call it Green Valley. And we do some research there as well. Other places where we do research that I won't be talking about today, but I wanted to show this to you just to get a sense of what the region looks like. Because we don't have trees, because raptors don't nest on the ground, raptors like peregrine falcons and gyrfalcons will nest on cliff faces like this. So this is my husband, Kurt, who has rappelled down into a peregrine falcon nest here. And so a lot of our work in Greenland also deals with larger birds, larger than puffins, like raptors. And so this research has been going on with our research team since 1990 in southern Greenland and 1993 in northwestern Greenland here. So we have a long-term record of what's been happening with the population of the two falcon species that we study. Now, this is hard to get to, right? Not only Greenland in general, but hard to get to these locations where these birds are nesting on these cliff faces. So one of the things that we're also working on in the last couple of years is that we have been installing cameras on these nests, and we drill into the rock here and we mount these cameras. Many of them very camouflaged. They don't seem to affect the birds at all. And this allows us to be able to see things that we couldn't normally see just by rappelling into the nests just once a year to check on birds or to ban the birds. But now we can see the exact time when the eggs are laid, when they hatch, when the young fledge, and the timing of all that. These are active with long battery life all through the winter, so we can actually get some winter scenes as well. And then we can see what happens in the spring when those birds first arrive. So this is all really important information to help us track that long-term change that we're seeing in both peregrine falcons and gyrfalcons here. Another thing that we do, which I'll touch on a little bit in this talk, is that the birds that we are capturing, we're taking samples from these birds. So we're primarily collecting blood samples, but we're also collecting feather samples as well. And this allows us to do a number of things like genetic studies, but also to look at the contamination load of these birds. And so you can see here one of our Augustana students here in the middle getting to participate in that research. And then one last thing that I just wanted to mention that we do as one of our ongoing mini research projects here is that we need to count and census birds of varying species. And one of them that I just wanted to share with you is called the Arctic tern. This is a bird that you may have heard of before. It has the longest migration of any animal. It breeds in the far Arctic and it winters in the Antarctic. We go to several small islands and we carefully walk across the island looking for their very camouflaged eggs here. We temporarily put a flag in just to count all of them. And then we go back and remove all the flags. What we've seen is that there's a very steep decrease in the number of terns that are in this region. And so we need to continue doing the census surveys to make sure we have a good understanding of where those birds are and how many of them there are. But there are a couple hazards, of course, with this. Arctic terns are very protective of their nests. And so you do have to be careful as you're walking along because they will actually dive bomb and peck at your head. Sometimes we even have to wear hard hats for this, but we enjoy it nevertheless. So let's talk a little bit about puffins now, which is the main reason that you're all here. Puffins definitely are very characteristic birds of the Arctic. People, I'd say the public in general is just absolutely fascinated with puffins, and for good reason. They're beautiful. Their colored beaks often give them the name the clowns of the Arctic. We see them in cereal brands. We see them in children's books. We see them in, I had to look this one up, but this is a cartoon on television that's all about a puffin here. And of course, we even see them showing up now in mask designs during our global pandemic here. So they are very amazing birds. They're a seabird. They spend the majority of their life at sea. They only come to land during the breeding season. So all the pictures that you see of thousands of puffins at these colonies throughout Europe and North America here, that's only for a very short period of their life that they're actually on land. The male and females actually look very similar to one another, nearly identical. The males are larger than the females, but there's also some overlap. And so you can't look at a bird and just be able to tell visually which sex it is. I wanted to, since I can't take you to the Arctic, I wanted to show you a little bit of what the birds sound like. And so I'm going to play an audio clip for you. And what you're going to hear first is a bird flying past the microphone. But then you're going to hear a series of different calls that the puffins make. And again, these are Atlantic puffins. There are 2 other species, but we're primarily focusing on Atlantic puffins here. Let's go back. And of course, the time when I need it to play, it's not. Well, that's okay. I won't try to imitate it for you, but it has often been likened to a chainsaw in the distance, kind of a roar sound. One of our colleagues thought it sounded like the bird was saying Earl. And so one of our decoys that we ended up using, we named him Earl because it was the sound of the bird that was here. So I apologize that that one didn't work for us today, but it's okay. Oh, and now let's stop that very briefly. Try it one more time. Always something with technology. All right, type in your questions while I'm working on this one that we actually did practice, believe it or not.
Jennifer, I can try and pull it up here too. Believe it or not, we really did this like 2 minutes before we started the webinar.
We did. It's always embarrassing when things don't work. But yeah, if you have that audio and want to have everyone listen to it, that'd be great.
All right, let's see if I can make it work here.
Thank you.
Well, don't thank me yet. Yeah, no, it's something happening here. Not cooperating.
We'll get this working here. There you go, you can hear it. Thank you. Okay. Now, pausing one more time. I will get this to work. This is always the part where you on the other side are cringing, like, oh, I feel so embarrassed for her right now. Thank you for feeling that way. All right, screen share. I think this is ready. And here we are. Thank you all for your patience. This is something I always have to tell my students too. Things just don't always go the way you want, and you gotta go with the flow here. All right, so we heard the puffins and what they sound like. We can see a little bit what they look like. Here's where the puffins in the North Atlantic reside. There are 12 to 14 million of them all across the Arctic, especially in the North Atlantic here. But they really are a declining population, and they're listed as vulnerable. Many of these populations are probably declining due to changes with the climate change, changing their food sources, the water temperature, the water salinity, the air temperatures, there's pollution, we have plastic pollution. A lot of these may be contributing to that. Majority of all the puffins live in Iceland and the rest of them in Norway. And so places that I'm going to show you in the very high Arctic are actually quite small populations, but super exciting nevertheless here. So again, working in far northwestern Greenland here, we know that there are puffins there, but they have been very understudied. And so what I'm going to share with you today is some of the first measurements we have of these birds, the first studies of where they actually go in the winter. And so it's pretty exciting to be a part of that. And so some things that I'll just touch on today. Where do they go in the winter? If it's 24 hours of darkness during the winter, they can't stay in Greenland. So where do they go? And who cares? Why does it matter that we want to know where they go? You have probably seen pictures of puffins from Scandinavia, from the UK, maybe from Maine and Newfoundland, but do our puffins go to the same places where the other puffins go in the winter? Is there any overlap? Do we care about that one? And again, why is a geographer talking to you today about puffins? Well, believe it or not, geographers don't just look at maps and make maps all day. We're looking, one of the things that I'm looking at is movement. Where do these birds go? The rate that they're moving, how long do they spend in these places? Do they overlap other birds? These are things that geographers do. So let me take you now to northwestern Greenland and where we work. You can see here the position of the Thule Air Base. Many people think, oh, you have to work in this really remote place like the air base. It must be really unfortunate. But honestly, it's pretty exciting. We don't have to live in a tent all the time. We have roads. We have access to a dining hall and to a grocery store. So in terms of high Arctic research, it's kind of a cush place that we can have an opportunity to research at, and we're very fortunate. The place that I'm going to take you to is called Dalrymple Rock. It is that tiny little speck on my map here. It is a conical, triangular shaped rock in the ocean, and it is only about 30 acres in size, so pretty small. Again, we need to get there by boat. Our boat has a safe harbor at the Thule Air Base, but when we get out on open sea, there are very few safe harbors, no docks that we can just pull up our boat to. So here's just a picture of what it takes to get us in and out of the boat here, pulling it up and anchoring it in places that we deem that are safe. We jump out with all of our gear. But before we can do any of that, we actually have to circumnavigate the island a couple times. And I'll give you a moment to think about why we need to do that. There's a hazard that could be on this island that we really want to be aware of. And that's another charismatic megafauna, the polar bear. Super cute picture here of a mother and her cub, but it is definitely something that we don't want to encounter when we are on the island. As I show you some pictures of what the island looks like, you can see there are many boulders around, and the polar bear could actually be hiding behind these boulders and have us not know it. So we're always constantly on high alert, even when we are on land and we think we have not seen any polar bears. Polar bears can't actually swim up to the island without us knowing it either. So we do definitely want to be careful, even though they're super cute. And these pictures were taken from a boat looking onto the island here, and the cub got super curious and even started coming towards us. But of course we were on land, or we were on the water, and they were on the land here. And here's another one we encountered. But once we know that the island is safe and secure, we can disembark, we can get on the land, and we can start working at the Puffin Colony. I mentioned 12 to 14 million puffins in the North Atlantic. In Western Greenland, we have less than 5,000, and it's on the decline. And where we work on this island, we have only about 30 to 45 individuals. But again, as I mentioned, they're pretty special. Here's one of my students here, just to kind of show you for scale what it looks like and the size of some of these boulders that are here. Again, when you've seen pictures of puffins before, you may have seen them hiding out or digging their burrows and hiding out in them. They lay one egg per pair. But in Greenland, we have permafrost. We don't have, the puffins cannot dig into the soil here. So this is not what things look like. We don't have lush green vegetation like that. The puffins actually have to nest in these little cracks and crevices here. This red arrow down here is pointing to a crack where we know that there is a burrow there. This was taken from, again, one of our camera traps that we have documenting one portion of the colony here. So the birds are still very successful. The colony here is not in decline as far as we understand, but this is very different looking burrowing from other colonies around the North Atlantic. When we're there, the birds are actually very aware of our presence, and so we try to limit the amount of time that we spend on the island. They're very smart, they're very wary, and we have to be kind of clever in how we capture them and how we hold them the least amount of time possible. So we can use dip nets to catch them out of the air. Closer to the burrows, we can actually put a small carpet or blanket out that has little monofilament nooses in it that will capture their feet. And then we need to be very close by in order to capture them so that they don't injure themselves while they're trapped here. Once we do that, we do need to make measurements of all the birds. So we weigh them, we take measurements of all their dimensions, we collect blood and feather samples, as I mentioned here as well. And so, yeah, we do have to put them in a mesh bag. They weigh upwards of, our largest was over 700 grams, so very large puffins in this colony here. The other thing that we do, which we've started in 2013, was we wanted to know where these birds go. And so in the winter, or we wanted to know where they go in the winter. And so we use a device called a geolocator or a light logger. And what you see here is the leg of the puffin. You can see a yellow band, and attached to that band is this sensor here. And it's a pretty simplistic sensor. It has a timer and it has a light logger. And so all it's recording is time and the amount of light that the sensor receives. This is pretty basic, but that continuous recording of information, when we process that, can provide us 2 locations for every day. So it can tell us exactly where they were around sunrise and sunset each time that the unit received light. This does not work in 24-hour darkness, doesn't work in 24-hour daylight, and does not work well when we have the fall equinox in September and the spring equinox in March. But we can get about 7 months of really interesting data for where these birds go. And each of those locations is accurate within about 185 kilometers. So no, we can't see how they go from one rock to another, but we can see large movements and where they go on a weekly or a monthly basis here. The trick, though, is even though these are small, they're affordable. The thing that's the trick is that you have to catch the birds the next year in order to get the data from them. These do not transmit, and we don't work in a place, you may have heard places that transmit their data are downloaded by cell tower. We don't have access to any of that in the high Arctic. So we have to retrieve, we have to find that same bird again and get access to that unit. Our success rate on this colony is about 36%, not too bad. We put out 25 units and got about 9 back. And when we capture the birds again, what we ideally want is to be able to take that data, leave the unit on the bird and download the data with the unit still on the bird. So here are just 2 pictures showing us holding the birds very, very, very still while we download that data. If we can't, or if the battery is dead, we remove it. And the units are really only on for about 2 years. So that's what we do. That's how we do it. But what kind of results have we found? What are the new and exciting things we've learned about puffins in one of the highest latitude, most remote puffin colonies in the North Atlantic? One of the things we learned actually just last field season was exciting is that Atlantic puffins are not the only puffins to visit our study site. Since 2013, we've known that we've had one single horned puffin that has been visiting the colony and is there with all intermixed in with all the other Atlantic puffins. But in 2019, we also had a tufted puffin. So this tiny island in the high Arctic, it's 30 acres in size. We have 3 different puffin species all together at the same time. You might be thinking, well, that's kind of cool, but really what's the big deal? The big deal, again, has to do with geography. So this map I'm going to show you here has in red where our study site is. In green here, I'm showing you the range of the Atlantic puffins. Now I'm going to show you where tufted puffins and horned puffins normally are. They are Pacific Ocean species. So the fact that we find them at the same location as an Atlantic species means that things are changing. These symbols through here in northern Alaska and Canada show places where these birds have been observed outside of the Pacific. But we're starting to see what we think has been seen in other species, that climate change is not just causing latitudinal movements, but also circumpolar movements between different ocean basins. So we're going to continue to monitor that and look for those patterns to see if they continue in the future. The other thing that I mentioned is that there are different colonies throughout the entire North Atlantic. And these are the locations of the primary studied Atlantic puffin colonies. And what researchers have found is that they believe that there are 3 subspecies of Atlantic puffins. And these are represented by the different symbols here. So we have a square, a circle, and the triangles that are here. And where we are working in the high Arctic is a subspecies called Nomani, and these are the largest size puffins. That's the only thing that really differs between these species or these subspecies. We have smaller birds in the south and larger birds in the north. We've known that for some time, since probably the early part of the 20th century, latter part of the 19th century. But there were very, very few samples from these high latitude populations to know for sure. Are they really all that big, or are there some differences here? So the measurements that we're taking of all of our birds in our study site here, we use them to compare to all the other colonies that have been studied. We looked at mass and wing length and tarsus length. And what I'm going to show you here highlighted in red, this is the mean of the size of the birds, the weight of the birds essentially, and then their range here. And what you can see is that our mean here is quite high compared to many of the other species or other subspecies and other colonies. In fact, our largest bird that I mentioned, around over 700 grams, is over twice as large, as heavy as the smallest birds are in the UK here. And again, you might be looking at this and thinking, show me pretty pictures. I don't want to see data. This is not that exciting here. But hold on to this little nugget of information, because when I show you some of the migration patterns, this is going to become important. The fact that we have large size puffins, larger than the other colonies throughout the North Atlantic, might have something to do with where our birds end up. So where do they go exactly? They are in northwestern Greenland at our study site from approximately the very beginning of June until the beginning of September. And they leave the colony and they need to go somewhere where there isn't 24 hours darkness and covered with ice. So through the use of our geolocators and the analysis and GIS or geographic information system research that I do, I'm just going to show you some plots of where these birds are approximately each of the months that we have data for. The males are going to be in circles, the females will be in triangles, and you'll see some very distinct differences in their patterns here. And I'm color coding them by month. So you can see here that they start out at the colony in September, and by October, they have spread themselves out, of course, around the western side of Greenland. There's one female who's hanging out quite far from the colony here. By November, they continue to move south. At this point in time, the sea ice is starting to grow and is starting to push down in across Baffin Bay here. So they're kind of pushed out of the way also. But during November and December, especially the males, they don't move a lot. They're actually sitting out here on open water, probably molting, which means they lose their flight feathers and they can't fly, and they're just hanging out on the water here. But notice the females, they're doing something different. Right? They're not clustered together with the rest of the males. They've spread themselves out. They're going quite far. As we move into January, we still see the females going very, very different locations than the males do. The males are still clustered here together. By February, the males start making their way over to the southeastern portion of Greenland, but the females are still quite far away. Remember, March is the spring equinox, so we don't have data for that month. But in April, the males spread out just a little bit. The females are still way out here. But by May, they start congregating back together. And they, oops, wrong direction. Here we go with May. And they start preparing to make their way back to the colony. So from May to the beginning of June, the end of May to the very beginning of the June, they have to make a very rapid migration back to the colony site. And for this particular female, she has even farther to go here. So even though we only had 9 birds, we had 3 females and 6 males, we can see some very distinct patterns between these. So a lot of sex differences based on their migration movements. And this, I just wanted to show you a picture of what it looks like when the birds are at sea. They are in big flocks or flotillas of birds. Here you see them intermixed in with some razor bills here. But generally they are either with all puffins or with other seabird species during those winter months. So whether it's dark or not, they're just out on the water. As long as it's open water, not covered with ice, they can be there. And so again, what I wanted to show you is that females have very distinctly different patterns than males do. And this is something that we hadn't known before. And not only are they very different patterns, but the females go much, much farther than the males. One of our females in particular, she went over 13,000 kilometers from the colony to the farthest winter location back to the colony, which was about twice as far as some of the males went. So again, pretty exciting. And remember that the females are the smaller birds. So the smaller birds actually went much farther than the males did. We have 2 years of data, 2 consecutive years of data for 3 birds, 1 female, which is on the far left-hand side, and 2 males. And again, we start to see some differences by sex here and these multi-year patterns. This female on the left-hand side, 1 year, she came down and hung out in the Western Atlantic. And then the next year, she was in the Eastern Atlantic. The males, notice, they basically do the same thing each year. And these locations here, like if you compare the blue circle with the blue triangle, those are approximately 200 kilometers apart from each other. So nearly identical pathways that these birds are taking. Again, we only have 3 birds, so we can't say too much about that, but it is really interesting to see how similar or dissimilar their patterns are from each other. So, I think some people might be wondering, okay, that's nice you showed us where these puffins go, but are they going to the same places where other puffins from Iceland, from Norway, from Maine, are they overlapping? Are they all coming together in one giant puffin flotilla and hanging out together? Yes and no, but again, there's some sex differences here. And before I move on to the next one, I do want to show you, this is our horned puffin friend who's sitting here right along with all the other Atlantic puffins. It looks very similar, but you can see the eye and the beak. There's a little bit of difference here. So what I'm going to show you in the next map is that it's really the females that, again, are doing something very different, and they tend to overlap with puffins from other colonies in the North Atlantic, and the males do not. So in this next graphic here, it's a little bit busy, so let me just walk you through what I'm showing you here. The colors in the background of the map here are sea surface temperature. So the darker blues and purples are colder temperatures, and the yellows and oranges are going to be warmer temperatures. On top of that, you're going to see the black circles for our male puffins and the white circles for our female puffins. And then you're going to see this white outline. And that white outline is showing you the boundaries of where puffins winter from other colonies in the Arctic. This was a study done by Fayette et al. In 2017, and really interesting geolocator data. So we can see in December that our females, again at the white circles, they are located where other puffins from other colonies around the Atlantic are wintering. The males, just a little bit. The very southern range of their location for December overlaps with the very northern edge here. Again, not too much, right? It's just the females that are doing this. I'm not going to show you all 7 months. I'm just going to show you 3 of the months here to show you that as we move into January, again, the males stay by themselves, they cluster together, and they are not with any other puffins from other colonies. The females, they are overlapping a little bit, but they've actually bypassed and gone to even warmer waters away from where the other puffins are. And then in February, we see something similar, that the males are just staying close to Greenland. They're not overlapping with other birds. Now, this is also the point where we need to do a little bit more research on this. But if you remember, I said that our males especially were the largest Atlantic puffins that have been measured, documented in these other colonies. We're suspicious that you look at this also, it shows that the bigger males are able to stay in colder water, whereas the smaller females need to or end up in warmer water. Could have something to do with their body size. Also, the other puffins are in warmer water compared to our larger males. So we're excited to explore that a little bit more in the future. We can't say too much about that yet, but it does, as a geographer, I'm looking at patterns, right? I see a really interesting pattern here. What's going on? Why are these larger birds having to or able to stay in colder water compared to other puffins of the same species? So we know a little bit about where they go and what kind of patterns that they have and how they differ by sex, but are they safe where they winter? Are these areas polluted? Are there fishing restrictions? Are there places where these birds might be contaminated? Maybe there's an oil spill. We don't know for certain if they're safe or not. Why? Because if you think about it, are there many boats out studying birds in the middle of winter in the open ocean of the North Atlantic? No, so we don't have a lot of data on that. But when the birds come back to the colonies, of course, we can sample, we can take measurements to look at contamination load and things like that. But what we do know is that there are some areas of the North Atlantic that are protected. And what we have found is that, again, our females do something very different than the males, and they utilize more of the protected waters of the North Atlantic than our males do. And so this last map that I'm going to show you, again, a little bit busy, but I'll just walk you through what you're looking at here. You'll see Greenland. You'll see our males in black and our females in white circles. This is for all months of the year. What you're going to see in the colors of yellow, blue, and red are areas of varying levels of protection or biological importance. So in yellow here, these are areas of the high seas that have some marine protection, meaning that fishing is not allowed there for various reasons. Many other seabirds also congregate in these areas, which is why they've been given some protection. There are some biologically important areas here in blue and some Canadian waters that have been either protected or are planning to have protection. But again, most of our females utilize these waters, whereas the males don't. Does that mean that the males are unsafe and the females are safe? Not necessarily, but it does help us see that perhaps if the males are here in southwestern or southeastern Greenland for many months of the year or many weeks of the year, do we need additional protection for those waters as well? So that's just a little bit about some of the highlights from the puffin research we've been doing over the last 10 years. And some of these are actually pretty new results, even from as recent as 2019. So where do we go from here? What are the new projects on the horizon or continuing projects that we're working on? I mentioned we are working with some colleagues in Europe to do some puffin genetic research to see if do we really have 3 subspecies if the only thing that differs between them is size, or is there a lot of overlap? So stay tuned for some results on that one. We've also put geolocators on other species throughout our study area. One of them is called a kittiwake, and this is another seabird. It looks like a gull. So we're going to be continuing to work on those. We're continuing to work on mercury contamination studies. So we did a study about 10 years ago looking at mercury load which is a neurotoxin. We did that in 24 different species, and now we're repeating that study again 10 years later to see if numbers have decreased or not. We're really excited about supporting graduate and undergraduate research here and giving students that experience, and so many more projects. But in order to do those projects, I did want to mention some of our funding sources and where we get our research money from. And if you'll notice here, we don't have big money from organizations like the National Science Foundation. Our money is coming from the Arctic Institute and Augustana College, some charitable foundations, but a lot of our money actually comes from individual donors here. The intent of this webinar is not to ask for your money, but I just wanted to mention that all of our individual donors are really a part of our research team. They are a part of our collaboration here. Without all these, it's not possible to do our research here. So we're very grateful for that. Now, stereotypically, many people end their presentations with a sunset photo. Because we have 24 hours of sunlight in the Arctic, I can't show you a sunset photo here, but this is the closest I could get here. If you want to know a little bit more about our research, some of these longer term projects, or a little bit more about the raptors that our team is researching, highly encourage you to visit the High Arctic Institute and their website that I have a link to here, and they're also on Facebook if you're into that as well. So thank you guys so much for listening to the presentation, and I'm happy to have Jessa coordinate some questions if I can answer for you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, we have a lot of great questions coming in here. Let's see. What is the source of the mercury that you were talking about being found in birds?
So the mercury comes from primarily mid-latitude coal-fired power plants. So a lot of the energy that we get in the United States currently comes from coal-fired power plants, and that actually makes its way to the Arctic. Also those in Europe and throughout Asia as well, as the primary source of mercury.
Lots of questions about how you get all these great pictures. Do you use drones when you're doing your research?
Very recently, we have been using drones for our research. It's a little bit tricky though, because the birds perceive the drone as a predator. And so some of the other birds are actually trying to attack the drone. So I would love to be able to use it a little bit more, to be able to count the nests maybe we see on an island, be able to count their heat signatures maybe instead of having to walk and disturb their colonies. But we have just barely touched the surface on what we can do with drones. But I think all the rest of the photos were non-drone photos.
Sure. In the photos of people holding the birds, they don't seem to mind. Do you have to, how do you soothe them? Are they tranquilized at all?
No tranquilizers. There are special protocols that we have to follow, international guidelines on bird handling and bird safety, and to make sure that we limit the amount of time that we're holding them. I don't like to show too many pictures of bird handling. It's not like a prize that we're trying to showcase here, but it is necessary to handle them in a very safe manner. We have to protect the birds as well. Many of their feathers that they have are the primary feathers that they're going to have that they need for migration. So we have to be very careful to handle them properly so that we don't disturb any of their feathers.
A couple questions. Are they monogamous, and when and where do they mate?
They are monogamous. I don't think they pair for life. I think they pair up again each year. I believe that they mate at sea. They don't on land, or it's more rare on land, but they are monogamous.
Let's see. Shad asks, what are their main predators?
Polar bears, I believe, would be one in our area. Arctic fox also. Again, you see really cute pictures of Arctic fox and you see them all white and they look all so cozy and cute, but they really are very vicious predators. They'll predate the eggs, especially, as will polar bears. In times when there's not a lot of food available, or if the sea ice goes out too quickly, polar bears end up on land and they will eat a lot of eggs.
Sure, that makes sense. It would take a lot of eggs to sustain a polar bear. Let's see here. Lots of questions. Do you find that, or is there evidence that attaching the trackers has any negative impact on the birds? Does it affect their flight?
Excellent question. We have to be very careful to make sure that we use the smallest unit possible so that it does not impact their rate of travel or anything else about their health. There are rules about the size, the body mass of the bird has to be a specific body mass to match the size of the unit that we put on them. But in terms of, does it affect their flight? To our understanding, it doesn't, because we see some of the first birds to arrive at the colony in June are actually the ones with geolocators on them. So they don't get there any later than all the rest of the birds. In fact, they might even get there earlier.
Let's see. Any evidence or research regarding birds being impacted by plastic ingestion?
So it's not something that we have studied. We are very interested in maybe doing something like that in the future. We try, well, I'll just back up and say the only way to do those studies is that you have to kill the bird. So it's by lethal means so that you can look at their stomach contents. We've tried all of our majority of our research is not involving that, right? So we try not to do that. But other studies from seabirds across the North Atlantic are showing that even in very remote areas, they are still ingesting microplastics. Yeah.
A couple questions about how many eggs they lay.
They lay one.
I think that's, yeah, you mentioned that. All right, I think we have time for maybe one or two more. Let me just kind of peruse this, and if somebody has a burning question, go ahead and put it in that Q&A. How can you tell the difference between a male and a female? I think you alluded to this a little bit, but.
Yeah, we can't do it in the field. We can take a guess, right, that the larger birds are going to be males and they'll be smaller birds will be females. But we actually have to use blood and genetic analysis to tell us if it's male or female.
And let me find one more in here. Great question. How cold is it when you're doing your research?
It's less cold than it has been in the past. Our summers are definitely getting warmer. You know, on average, I would say it's probably in the 40s. That would be sort of an average. We do have some quite warm days where we actually get into the 60s. And this is Fahrenheit. 60 degrees is a really, really warm day in the high Arctic. Weather patterns are definitely changing. Precipitation patterns are changing. It used to be that we would have snow, sometimes even in August or July occasionally. Now it rains, and sometimes it rains a lot. And if you are, doesn't matter what species you are, you don't have trees to protect you, right? Many of the birds are ground nesting birds, and so they lay their they lay their eggs in the cup that they make on the ground, and when it rains, then that fills with water. We have a lot of mortality issues here. So temperatures are definitely changing. And of course, I'm showing you all the pretty weather pictures too. When it's bright and sunny and it looks gorgeous, there are many really, really cold days too, especially when you're out on the water and you're in a boat that doesn't have an enclosed cabin. Lots of layers, lots of high quality gear. For me, lots of toe warmers that need to stay warm.
Yeah, especially when it's supposed to be summer,
Exactly.
back where you call home. All right, one last question here, and then I think we'll wrap up. Do puffins have cultural significance to the local people in Greenland? And do you know anything about that?
They might, but because there are so few of them, at least in northwestern Greenland, they are probably not one of the most culturally significant. Eider ducks are more significant. Culturally, they collect, the local Greenlanders would collect eggs. And there are other larger seabirds that they would hunt for meat, and actually smaller seabirds too, little dovekies and thick-billed murres. Those would be a little bit more of a food source probably than puffins. But they are a culinary delicacy in places like Iceland, I know.
All right, well, thank you so much, Dr. Burnham. We really appreciate your time and your expertise. It's been really interesting to spend a little time thinking about puffins. So our sincere appreciation to you. I hope that
your patience too.
Of course, yes. Thank you too for everybody for putting up with our minor glitch. Just a reminder, if you are able to support North House, today's Give to the Max Day, givemin.org is a great place to do that. And I hope some of you can join us for the Q&A tomorrow at noon, as well as the Poetry Slam on Saturday night. Thanks so much again to everybody, and take care.